Here we go, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Let me change to just speaker view. Here we go. Oh no, boom. All right, everyone. Welcome. I'm Danny Tejada. I'm a college counselor. I'll talk a little bit more about my experience in a bit, but today is sort of the relaunch for my consulting that I've been doing for quite some time, especially more so when I was back in New York, and I'm sort of expanding it even more to do professional development for counselors because for me it's very important that all of y'all have the tools that you need to be able to serve, you know, especially the kind of students, the population that we're talking about today. So I'll definitely give in the slides in the chat at the end, and I will also email it as well because there's going to be a lot of links in it that you can click on, different resources and what have you. And when you get the chance, you can feel free to click check out my website right there, clickable. Follow the my organizations, my companies, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn as well. And then in the last slide is more of my personal social media if you want to follow me on there as well. So the first thing I want to say is that it's very, very important that when you partake in this work, and especially by you virtually even being a part of this PD, that you understand that Black Lives Matter. And if it's not something that you believe, then how you expect to serve the kind of population that brought you here today? You need to believe in them. You need to value their lives. You need to understand that Black Lives Matter is not a political issue. Quite frankly, I'm always get offended whenever I see stuff like that because my life is not a political issue. My right to live is not a political issue. So as you go on, keep this in mind as you work with these kind of students, and to even put more force behind this, because the most important thing is, are you giving your all when you serve these kind of students in your schools, or even, your clientele, because I believe there are some consultants on here as well. So a little bit about me. I'm a college counselor of 7 years. And for me, I became a college counselor because of the people who helped me get into college. I went to Skidmore College. I applied to early decision, got into the higher education opportunity program, and my life changed forever. I grew up in an impoverished neighborhood in East New York, Brooklyn, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in New York City, in public housing. And I was the oldest of three. I had to grow up pretty fast. I dealt with a lot of domestic violence in my home. So for me, going away to college was like a dream, and it really changed a lot for my family. I was the first gen student, first to graduate high school, first to graduate college. It was very much, and you're gonna probably deal with a lot of this with the families that you work with, and maybe you already have. Families who are on the opposite side of the spectrum. My dad's side of the family didn't want me to go away to college because they think that it was very expensive. They didn't really know much about financial aid. They didn't really know much about opportunity programs. They didn't know much about schools like Skidmore giving great amount of aid to students like me at the time. So, and then you have my mom's side, who was very supportive and wanted me to do what I wanted to do, but it really caused a huge rift in my family for me to go away. And it's definitely something that had some ripple effects while I was there. I barely went back because I couldn't really afford to. So this is the kind of things you got to think about. The ripple effects when you work with students like this. And also as well, if it wasn't for me making that step and making that jump, my sister, who is away in college right now too, she wouldn't have as much support as she does now. Because the same people who were totally against me are now pushing her like, oh, you better do it too, because I was able to do it. So just know that when you push a student to go to a school like Skidmore, to go away and their first gen and what have you, is going to have great positive ripple effects. And so on the left here is from my first role when I used to work at Pace University's Liberty Partnership Program in Financial District. Some of the students there on an alumni day. And then on the right is me on graduation day with one of the very few Black folks on Skidmore's campus. So it was in my senior year when I reflected upon, I was an American Studies major. I thought I wanted to be a hip hop journalist. I was very serious about that. I started to get clips in XXL magazine. I started to take radio very seriously. I was on the radio for 4 years. I did mixtapes. I was supposed to be, I thought I wanted to be an A&R, because I loved working with artists. But I felt like I wanted to do something more. I felt like there was something missing. And then I thought very heavily about the people who helped me get to college. I will never forget the moment when my college counselor told me in front of everyone in my senior year during the academic year if I was going to apply a decision to Skidmore. And back then, I used to stutter a lot. It was very difficult for me to talk. So, and I used to be very, very nervous too, very much on the edge because of the way that I grew up. So he told me to go down to the computer lab and don't come back up until I figure it out. So not having even visited the school, this was a time where there wasn't really much funding to go visit schools or anything like that. So I went down, talked to a friend who was asking more at the time, looked at their website some more, and came up with the decision to apply a decision. And I'm glad that he really put that force on me. That's the kind of thing that I needed. And one of the things that you have to understand when you approach this kind of work is you have to understand what kind of student that you're dealing with, and when they need certain kind of pressure, when they need more nurturing or what have you. You have to read the room. You have to talk to them. You have to engage them. And as for any questions, there'll definitely be a question and answer towards the end. So feel free to keep posting your questions in chat and I'll follow along. So as some of you know who follow me on Twitter and Facebook, I post a lot of wrestling gifs. I'm a huge wrestling fan, so expect to see more and more of that as you go through, as we go on in the presentation. But one of the things that's very important is when you're dealing with this population is that you provide like wraparound services. It's important for you to be knowledgeable about college admissions in this population. So I have some suggestions here. I'm sure some of you already are aware of these things, but it's important for you to join these things, engage in these things, read up on these things, because this is how you get little tidbits. This is how you get information. This is how you get leads. This is how you really help your students get to the next level. Because one thing that I learned in this process, in becoming a college counselor myself, is that information is king. So, and it's important for you to have conversations about grades and course selection starting in the 9th grade right away. I feel like a lot of the conversation ends up coming junior year, but it's important that we try our best to let our students know that 9th grade, you have to set the tone, and make sure that you challenge yourself as much as you can. And then 11th grade is about starting to piece it all together, create your list, schools to visit or what have you. And then in 12th grade, of course, we're wrapping it all up. The essay's done, you're filling out your application, et cetera, et cetera. But it's important for you to use your connections, right? When you go to conferences and you get those business cards, you interact with people and you make counselor calls for students. It's so key. Some of you know here that it's key to have relationships in this line of work to be able to get your kids to the next level. I could tell you countless and countless stories of HEOP directors, higher education opportunity directors when I was back in New York telling me, oh, we got a spot for the student, but I'm not hearing from them. And then they will reach out to me and then I will push the student to make sure they submit their income documents and check their email or make sure they set up their interview or whatever the case is. I know we expect our students to be self-sufficient and stuff like that, but it's about that delicate balance between hand-holding and pushing them. So you want to make sure that you really help them take advantage of their opportunities as much as they can. And I know some of you, maybe a good portion of you, might be in positions where you can't really go on college trips that much. I definitely encourage you to check out that last link to see if you could partner with a local community-based organization. I know for me, if it wasn't for Pace University Upward Bound, I would not have even heard of Skidmore. Skidmore wasn't visiting my high school. you know. And I got to see a Skidmore rep and so many more reps of selective institutions at Pace University when they came to go visit us on Saturdays during the summer program and what have you. Community-based organizations do great work. They give students a lot of exposure to different schools. I can't praise CBOs enough, and that's where most of my background comes from, working in CBOs. So junior year, right? Junior year, it's all about helping them build a balance list. Of course, you don't want to have too many selected institutions. Balance list, basically the GPA, test score if they have it. I know we're in a new age now, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But who needs schools? I think it's the important when you talk about this population that we're talking about now is what are those who need schools, right? The schools that are going to give them complete funding, even though there might be some loans left over or whatever the case is. I'm talking about zero gap, right? Now, you also see this other link here that will show you like black and brown students are more successful at places like this when we look at graduation rates. So it's important that you have constant contact with your student. You help them with their Common App essay every 2 weeks until it's complete. That was the thing that I was up to in New York. Like every 2 weeks I was meeting with the same student over and over and over again. I even do it now in St. Louis in the fall, meeting with the same student over and over and over again every 2 weeks to make sure that the essay was a true representation of them. So you got to help them sign up for different scholarship opportunities and pursue those opportunities as well. One thing I like to talk about is I graduated Skidmore with no loans, and that's because a lot of my family members told me that, like I said before, the college wasn't affordable, stuff like that. So I started to apply to a whole bunch of outside scholarships, and I won at least 3 of them, and also becoming an RA my last year at Skidmore, and on top of being a part of the HELP program, helped me graduate with no loans at all. So I always try to tell students, there's tons of money out there. You got to go for it. You got to write those essays. I know it's going to be tiring. I know it's going to be a lot of work. And I know sometimes it's going to be disappointing, but trust me, like I applied to, I can't even remember how many, but it was a lot. And I only won 3, right? And I always tell them too that every little bit counts, because that $500 that your friend thinks that is not worth applying to is booked for you that semester. So definitely check out all those links as well, and blast scholarships as they come to you, to students, and help them with their scholarship essays, more particularly if it ends up being different than the Common App essay. Sign them up for college fairs and rep visits online, right? I did this before COVID happened, but push them, encourage them. One of the things I used to do in New York is I used to pull students in to rep visits. I used to get students to apply to certain flying programs, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. But it's more about like, hey, you might not heard of this thing, but check it out, listen. That's how I've heard of Skidmore. Someone pulling me in. Sign them up for rep visits in your school. Pull them in if you have to, right? If you're doing something virtual and you having, whether it's auditorium, conference room, whatever the case might be, right? Try to get them in somehow. Two programs I'll suggest to you is QuestBridge College Prep Scholars. Look into that and see if your students will qualify for that. Posse Foundation, you might be a Posse school. If you aren't, then look into becoming a nominating school. And it's a very easy, open process to make that happen. I used to work at a school in the South Bronx that was not a posse nominating school, and it was definitely a smooth transition, no headache to make that happen. Does your local ACAC, your professional association, have a camp college? Now, I linked New York State ACAC's camp college there, and we recently did a virtual one where it's like a college admissions boot camp. Like they're learning the ins and outs of the process. So programs like this are very helpful because they're able to hear from reps in more of a personal way than the traditional "this is my school," blah 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 kind of stuff. Um, have students watch the flying program list for due dates. Now, in the next slide, you'll see that I linked to a virtual update because College Greenlight, this is the link where the link comes from, has created another page for colleges that are doing virtual flying programs. Now, flying programs is something that is it brings a lot of exposure to students. It gets students to change their mind on things. I remember one time I worked with a student before I came to St. Louis, who wasn't even thinking about Trinity College. She was so set on Franklin and Marshall because one of her friends went there. And then the school, the organizations that I worked for, had a policy of trying to get students who were going to say like 85 and above on a 100-point scale in New York to get them to apply to at least 3 flying programs. And I was able to get her to apply to Trinity. Trinity's flying program. She got on it. She went. She loved it. She said, I felt like I was a part of the family there. And then she quickly switched her mind from Franklin and Marshall to wanting to apply early decision to Trinity, got in, and things turned out for her pretty well in terms of financial aid as well. So I can't stress flying programs enough. So definitely, if you see a school on this list that's not virtual flying program yet, definitely encourage the student or even use yourself if you're really trying to push students to apply to flying programs to ask the school if they are doing a virtual one. Because the college greenlight list, I don't know how often that it updates, but someone from Holy Cross just emailed me because some of you might be on the NACAC listserv where I blasted this out. That they submitted the form long ago, still haven't been added yet. So it's definitely worth you to touch base with those colleges to see if they are doing some sort of virtual version. Early decision talk. I should have updated this link because I think it's last year's chart. I know this year's chart just came out, but that's a link to, early decision acceptance rates, regular decision acceptance rates, and what percentage of early decision is filled for that class. Now, it's no secret. A lot of us know that a lot of schools fill up most of their class, probably even half their class, early decision. So it's important for you to talk to those students very early on in their junior year, especially if they have the grades, they have the test score, about early decision and what it could do for them, and see if they can get really crazy about one school in particular. For me, it's not about like, is this a better chance for you? It's about, are you crazy about this school? Like, you got to convince me that you're crazy about this school. Did you go visit? What are some things at that school that stands out from you? I won't just like sign any early decision agreement right off the back. Like, I need to be convinced, but I'm also going to talk to you about early decision because it might be something that's good for you, and I definitely talk students out of early decision in my career, talk students into early decision in my career. It's all about, the best fit for them on both sides, right? And in the junior year, take the time to interview the student, get to know them more, gather teachable quotes. The most amazing thing I've done a couple of years ago was a colleague told me, hey, reach out to the teachers, get some quotes from students, especially when you don't really know them that well. It helps bring a lot of context. And some of the most engaging recommendations I've written was when I interviewed the student and I had teacher quotes to go along with my own narrative. I had reps always reach out to me and say, wow, like, I was really blown away by this recommendation. Don't get me wrong, not every recommendation I write is a hit, but there are times where they are. It depends on how much the teacher gives me. It depends on how much the student gives me when I interview them. So senior year, I would say meal prep dinner time now, right? We in this. So have students apply to at least three flying programs and help them with those essays. I included the link to the virtual update, so definitely check that out when I send out the slides. Help them finalize the college list with full need schools. Um, Help them with supplemental essays as well every 2 weeks, and encourage students to do in-depth research on the school. I can't tell you how many times I've seen supplemental essays that simply copy and paste, and I think y'all know that doesn't really work. So I always tell students, check out the course catalog. See if there's any classes that you think you might be interested in, and talk about that. Talk about why would you want to take a class like that. Do some research on clubs that you think you might be interested in. So things like that, like do something very unique with your supplemental essays when it comes to things like why NYU, why Syracuse, or what have you. Stay away from the generic stuff because it could really be obviously seen. Again, sign them up for college fairs, red visits. And another program, QuestBridge College Match. That might be something you might want to also check out as well to see if your student might be able to be a fit for that. Or Division 1 and 2 plans. It's sometimes things don't work out with decision one with a student, and we have to learn how to comfort them, be there for them for that, and hopefully they have another school that they really loved, and you can get them to apply to early decision too. Or maybe even sometimes there was a student before I left for St. Louis when I was living in New York. There was a student who I talked to her for so long about her decision, and she didn't make her mind up until early decision two. With the school that she ended up applying to because one of her friends got an early decision one there. It was Northeastern, actually. Yeah, Northeastern. So, sometimes it takes it takes a lot of talk, a lot of friends in the ear. But you also have to be the mediator. Is there something that's right for you? At the end of the day, like for example, like she gave me reasons why. It wasn't just like, oh, because my friend got in her decision one, I want to apply there too for her decision two. She gave me really concrete reasons why she wanted to go to Northeastern. Console calls. Now, console calls is not something I ever really did until before my last year in New York is when I really did them. I was working for our Uncommon Charter School Network, and more of in a formal way. I used to do it in an informal way, like just call people. It wasn't like any schedule or anything like that, but at Uncommon, it was more of a schedule. Like, okay, there were three of us, and we all split up schools between the three of us and made up times where we would call those schools and ask about certain students, how they're doing or what have you. And I will never forget the moment when, in that year when I was at Uncommon, I had two students who wanted to apply early season to Rochester. And sometimes when something like that happens, it's just like, oh, I don't know, two can get in. I don't know, but especially when one was stronger than the other academically, a little bit stronger. But I'm glad that I built this rapport with the rep who was able to tell me even beforehand, who's able to tell me, hey, if he were to pick up his grades in calculus more, then I could make more of a case for him in committee. So without even telling him the reason why he needed to pick up his grades in calculus, like I didn't tell him, oh, this rides on you getting into Rochester. It was more about me trying to play, I guess you could say, more of a big brother role. Like, hey, like you need to follow up with your teachers. You need to speak to them during lunch. Speak to him during after school or what have you. Try to pick up your grade as much as you can. And I kept pushing him. He started to see me as a role model, and he picked up his grade, a lot, and he still kept it going even after he was accepted to University of Rochester. So sometimes, these constant calls could really make a difference, and even build more of a bond between you and your student. In the senior year in the spring, it's very important that you review financial aid packages with these students, and help them understand how much they're going to owe after 4 years. Not just the first year, because a lot of families think about just the first year. All right, we got to think about times four, y'all. What's it going to look like at the end? And if they need to work on appeals, help them write an appeal letter to describe their circumstances, why they would need more funding. And at the same time, too, they have to be realistic. Like how much. There's been times where I talk to families in my career and ask them. I say, hey, zero gap is not realistic. How much can you guys actually pay? And when that happens, sometimes that worked out for them to be able to get that amount of money to be able to get to the gap that was doable for the family. So, but it's also important. This last point is very critical, especially when we're talking about this population, is that we prepare them for life in college, right? Not only for, academics, 'cause I feel like a lot of times in high school, students and Jeff just probably so, like I get it, are given so many chances. And meanwhile, in college, it may not necessarily be like that. You have to be very independent. You have to advocate for yourself and what have you. So we have to do our best to really like show students that this is what it's like academically. This is what it's like socially. And one of the things that I found very beneficial was holding alumni days with students. Like if you could reach out to older alumni of color to talk about their experience, especially when they're closer to age, those students will listen to them a lot more than you, even though you said the same exact thing. You already know how it is. But it really helps change the trajectory for a lot of the students and helps them become more focused when they get to that next level. So one thing that's important is relationships, right? Whenever we get back to normal, engage reps at conferences. I remember in my first job in my career 7 years ago being very nervous because, I was still, even though I was on the radio, when you're on the radio, you don't think about the audience, like you're just talking to yourself. At least that's how I thought about it. So it's when I went to my first conference, I was very nervous, and my colleague pulled me aside and said, hey, it's not just about networking for yourself, it's about networking for the students, in terms of getting key information, be able to push for them even harder to get certain slots and programs or what have you. So, engage with them, even talk to them after, the college rep visit at your school, even if it's virtually, if they have the time. I remember, and this was something that was very common for me all throughout my career, that one time I was very surprised when I was working in the South Bronx. After a rep visit, I spoke to the rep after, and they were like, wow, like, number one, the counselor never stood in the room before in any of my visits. So that kind of blew my mind because this was like a regular thing for me. And two, wow, like no one had ever took the time to talk to me like I'm a human right after, you know? So it's definitely helpful for you to, engage people on a more human level, because a lot of these reps do care about, access to college as well. A lot of them that's why they get into this. And whenever we get back to normal, attend consular events in your city and consular trips as well. I remember early on in my career when I found out about consular trips, consular tours, the beginning of my career 7 years ago, my mind was totally blown that I was the only public school CBO counselor on these trips. A lot of the time, they were private school counselors. A lot of the time, they were private consultants. So whenever we get back to normal and colleges resume this and you feel comfortable going, definitely take advantage because I was able to ask very key questions too, even things about default rate, for example, after doing research on different schools before I go visit them. Because the last thing I wanted was to ask questions that are already on the website. And I already talked a bit about console calls, so I can't really stress that enough, to make that time before, that decision is made on an application. So, COVID, right? The big elephant in the room. I think it's very important to note that over half the colleges will be test optional next year, and I'm really glad that National ACAC put out that, and I can't even believe we had to do this, but like put out that whole thing about that test optional means test optional, and that's something that you need to stress to your students. Even now and even into the future. The biggest thing is that um, testing, the fact is that testing benefits more of the wealthy, and test optional does not mean less than. And that's something we need to get across to our students. Testing does hold these students back, and the fact is that these tests were never really made for them. So if you are interested in seeing the research, definitely click that link when you get the slide. But we have to remind students that testing does not define them. I know a lot of them, they really hold on to the fact that, all right, I have a bad SAT score, bad ACT score, I'm never going to get into a good college. Meanwhile, and even before the age of COVID, there were so many great colleges that were test optional, even so many that were full need as well. So and quite frankly, I always tell the students right off the jump, hey, my SAT score was abysmal as well, abysmal, and this was way before Skidmore went test optional. So and I ended up becoming a success, graduating on time, and really doing great work in this industry. So test score does not define you. And I think it's very important on this last point is to understand how colleges have handled the virus and how would they proceed with the fall. I'll be straight up with you. If a college is still requiring test scores for admission and for merit scholarships, then you need to tell the student, you need to let your students think very clearly, does that college value their life? And even if it's up to public colleges who depend on their state legislator to make those kind of decisions, then you also got to think too, those politicians care about those students' lives? Now they gotta think, right? If this school's not test optional all around, then what's it gonna be like when I'm there? So I came across this final link here that talks about how different colleges are handling the virus now, in the fall, what they did this past spring. So it's very important. It's important for students to see that as well, because now we also got to take physical health very seriously in this day and age. So um, one key thing is, on the final point here, is you as a college counselor, you might be all that they got, right? You might be the only cheerleader. You never know at all. So every interaction that we have with this population, with these students, is very, very important. So when you get the slide, you can always feel free to email me. These social media links are my personal social media links. And if you happen to work at a private school and you are of color, I created a Facebook group just for us, so we can talk about, what's it like to be one of the very few and maybe even only person of color working at a private school. So now I'm going to look into taking in some questions here while I let's see here. No. Start up top. Let's see. People talking about their online plans. Great point about posse nominations, Sharon. Yes, Ethan, virtual fly-ins are happening. Um, has the process changed where members are communicating? Okay, they're asking about posse. I require my CBO students to apply to fly-ins. Yes, that's very, very important. Most fly-ins do not require a nomination, Kathy says. That's something that's key too, you know. Do you only recommend ED for colleges that meet full need? When it comes to this population that we're talking about, yes. I will only recommend early decision for colleges that meet full need when it comes to low income, high achieving Black and Brown students, because quite frankly, it's tough to have that conversation with them when they get accepted and they get that financial aid package. That's very disappointing, um, and to try to help them bounce back after that, it's very difficult, you know, because they put so much time and effort and emotion into loving the school, but then to be gapped by thousands. So, you know, for sure, I would say we need colleges for this population. Do you have any recommendations for how to? This is Kennedy, for how to improve our ability to coach students on essays. Sometimes I find myself wish I had an English teacher's background or knowledge or pedagogy that would be a better approach to helping students structure and think about an essay. Um, Kennedy, I would say reach out to the English teachers, partner with them. You know, for me, when I work with students with essays, it's about content. And yeah, I used to be a journalist, so I'm able to edit a little bit on that front, but I'm more concerned about content. So when I sit down with students all throughout my career, I always tell them, you know, oh, this is interesting. You should expand on this. Or maybe you should scale back on this, or you need to cut this out, or whatever the case is. You know, I'm more about content, and then I always tell them, hey, you know, reach out to the English teacher, ask the English teacher for help when it comes to the grammar stuff and what have you. You know, so I think it's very important that us as counselors help students read a student's essay and see when we see something that's interesting, encourage them to expand on it more, or when something shouldn't really be in there, you know, talk to them in a way of like, this shouldn't be in here because of XYZ, but what about this, you know, like always offer something extra on the side with them. um Story 2 is definitely a great resource. The college essay guy has great free resources, and I did link that on my resource page, on my website, I believe. um Asked about posse. Uh, yes, I did mean college green night. Um, thank you, Ellen. Have you had students attend HBCUs done financially? We have some great scholarships, but that is not certain. Um, when it comes to Black colleges, it's very difficult, you know, in the sense of like students need to first of all, you know, I think it's kind of interesting that um, Black colleges, some of these Black colleges, more prominent Black colleges, aren't test optional yet. So I think that's something that's very interesting. But you know, when it comes to the financial piece, you know, it's a struggle for some of these colleges, and they want to do well. They graduate this population really, really well. But as sometimes too, some students can't continue on to the next year because they can't pay a $200 bill, whatever the case is. Um, and then sometimes too, I've seen students have to take out a parent plus loan, you know, with their parent. That's a crazy, insane amount. So, you know, if the student wants to go to a Black college, they have to understand they have to hustle hard for scholarships. You know, keep applying to them, keep searching out for them. You know, I think Black colleges are great, but you got to do the work to find the financial resources so that way you can go to institutions like that. How do you do through organizations envision their support through the COVID crisis? So many seem to rely on face-to-face peace, cohort accountability in order to foster retention. Um, it's this is sort of a question about the virtual stuff and interacting with students virtually. You know, one thing that I found very helpful with during this virtual space and doing camps. I've done two camps. I've done NYU Cali. I've done New York State ACAC's Camp College, and we're talking about this population here who was fully engaged in the programming. So they want to make it happen. They want to partake. It's just all about it's it there. But the thing is like how do we hold them accountable, right? One of the things I do even when we were in person was I would send out calendar invites to students. As crazy as it may sound, like calendar invites, they don't even check their email. But like I found out that with calendar invites, it really holds them accountable because they get the notification on their phone and what have you, and they show up for those things, most of the time that I found, as opposed to like when I wasn't doing calendar invites and then I had to go find a student in their classroom and pull them out or whatever the case is. So I think the key thing is when it comes to this virtual stuff is consistency, maybe even contacting the family in their home, the parents. When it comes to the virtual, parents is going to be very key, right? Parents, if parents don't hear anything, they think everything is fine. If you're struggling to reach out to a student, reach out to their parent and be like, hey, I'm trying to help your student do this, that, and the third. Like you got to have your parents become your allies in this process too, on top of like sending calendar invites or what have you. How can admissions officers support counselors at Title I schools? Good question, James. I think the one way admissions officers can support counselors at Title I schools is making that outreach, reaching out, getting in contact with the principal, getting in contact with the counselor. I know sometimes it can be very difficult to find out who to get in contact with, but you got to make that initial reach. I think sometimes the expectation is like, all right, high school should reach out to me so we can make stuff happen. But if admissions officers, like for example, like if you come from an impoverished background yourself, why not go back to your own high school and talk about the college that you work for? Things like that, like being proactive about the connection that you make with folks. I think that's key. What's the best advice for counselors to become comfortable with financial aid process? We know that many first-gen families are intimidated by this process, and counselors can feel uncomfortable giving financial aid advice. It's as crazy as it may sound. I feel like conversations about financial aid with the population that we're talking about now, has been so much easier than where I work at now, right? Most of the families I work with now, because for me, I always been about, if we're talking about searching for colleges, looking up colleges or what have you, then the first thing you got to think about is financially even before you apply. Because the last thing you want is to invest yourself in a school like that and then have it not work out financially. So, I think it's important for you, as a counselor, to maybe even talk about your own experience. I know sometimes families of these students can be very afraid to send their kids away, right? And I sat down with parents before and had honest conversations with them about my college experience and what it did for me, you know, and that usually does change the whole narrative for those students, for those families, because parents just want to know the kid's going to be okay. And when it comes to the financial aid piece, one thing that I really learned is that money talks, right? Why stress yourself out before you apply with families, when students are applying to, schools that make financial sense to them. When those financial aid packages come in, have the conversation with those parents, break it down to them. There's been times too where I had parents who were adamant about not applying to certain schools, only applying to schools locally, whatever the case is. And then when the financial aid packages came in, and I explained to them what it was like and how they had to pay nothing, they were all for it, right? So a lot of the times, money really does talk. Um, Thank you for sharing. Excuse me, the college essay resources, Abby. Let's see. Um, do you have a good resource for colleges that fund students at 100% demonstrated need? On the slides, I did link to a chart which I need to update. So I'm not gonna send the slides right now because I want to include the latest information on it. Um, that is gonna have a chart that was done by these two consultants who put out this information every single year. You know, early decision, acceptance rates, how much percentage need colleges meet, or what have you. So when I update that slide and send it out sometime today, you can clearly see like which school is meeting 100% need because you'll see that column right there. Uh, let's see. Abby definitely has a great suggestion about reaching out to coaches that students on for teams, you know, or maybe even some advisors that people might be close to. Definitely great advice. Um, Kathy, yeah, it definitely helps to have a spreadsheet to compare financial aid awards between different schools. That's one thing that I definitely even do myself. Like I punch the numbers in, print it out for them, and clearly show them this is what it's like after year one, and here's what it's like after year four, so they can compare and contrast between all the different options. How do you communicate with families who are willing to go into debt when they are more concerned with the name of the school? I think I'm trying to think. To be honest, I'm not sure if I ever been in a totally intense situation where the parent was really adamant about a student going to a school because of the name or what have you. There's definitely been times where um, the family was thinking about a certain school, and then when I did the financially breakdown to them and showed them what the actual numbers were, they quickly changed their mind. Because a lot of the time they were just thinking of that first year. Okay, we could try to do the first year, and then I was like, okay, but you do realize that we're talking about 4 years in total here, so let's times that by four. So how are you going to be able to do this every single year? Even if you do take out a parent plus loan. When it comes to these families and parents, I always tell them if it gets to a point where you're considering taking out a parent plus loan or even a private loan, then maybe that's not the school for you. Because you got to think about this long term. You got to think about having a degree at the end of the day. You don't want to be able to not go to year two or year three because your mom and dad is not able to afford it, and then you can't even transfer your credits because the college won't release your transcript, and then you end up getting lost in the sauce. So I think a lot of the time is about being honest about the realities of it all. What's going to happen if you don't pay that bill? What's going to happen when you have all of that debt? Show them what the monthly payment is going to be like. How suffocating is going to be for them for the rest of their lives. I think I I think when you give a lot of narratives, you give them a lot of numbers. That's all you can do at that point. But you have to educate them as much as they can. And I never had a parent like go completely opposite of like pursuing a school because of the name and once again massive debt. I definitely talked some families out of doing stuff like that. Thank you, Peggy. Oh, and for all you guys who are concerned about my biking accident, I'm definitely recovering a lot better now. But usually, if you know me, that I usually talk with two hands. My left hand is very difficult for me to lift it up. So, but I'm doing a lot better now. Um, let's see here. Thank you, Kathy. CollegeData.com, great resource. Um, oh, thank you, Crystal, for Georgetown's return on investment data set. Um, and I went through the whole list. So if does anybody else have any questions or any commentary, you can feel free to even unmute yourself and speak or what have you.
Hi, Danny. Thanks for hosting today.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming on through.
Yeah, no problem. I once worked at a high school where we were understaffed, and so we did rely heavily on English teachers to do some editing um, of college essays. And some of those English teachers were very helpful, and some weren't. And I was trying to like figure out why, because they were all very experienced individuals. And one of the things that we realized is that some English teachers like really do understand the essence of what a college essay is, and some approach it more like they would for an analytical essay or an academic essay. And that was like one of the things that we tried to give some feedback on students, that the teacher really needs to understand the process in order for them to be effective as they coach students who developing their essays.
You're totally right, and that's something that I heard about time and time again, all throughout my career. And even in the school that I'm at now, some teachers would tell me, it'll be helpful for us to learn a little bit about the process. But it's all about trying to find that time, right? But I remember one time, I did have for example, with teacher recommendations, right? Because it's also an issue with teacher recommendations, especially in schools, low resource schools, that teachers don't really know how to write teacher recommendations. It's more like you're listing off the student's resume, when that's really more my role as the counselor, I guess, to somewhat do that. Your role is to talk about how's the student in the classroom. You know, are they a leader? Do they help out? Do they ask you for help after school, or whatever the case is? Because the college wants to know how's the student in the classroom. So there's been times you might want to reach out to some of your fellow college buddies, college rep buddies, and ask them, would you be willing to talk to these group of English teachers to talk about what a college essay is like? Um, and even when it comes to the recommendation, can you speak to all of our teachers about what a college what a teacher recommendation is like? You know, because it's I think when they hear it from the source, is sometimes they just like the kids, right? You could be saying something, but then when someone else different says it, who seems more experienced, then they're more attentive, right? So definitely reach out to your local college buddies, because they definitely will be willing to help out. I think college reps would like to do things that isn't necessarily just talking about their school all the time, and definitely would like to have more interactions when it comes to increasing more, when it comes to increase more access as well. Any other questions or comments? Sorry, comments.
I also wanted to excuse me. I also wanted to piggyback on what Crystal said. What worked really well for us was actually having the college essay integrated into the 12th grade English curriculum at the beginning of the year. And I mean, maybe you could do some type of like summer PD with them, just to get them up to date on what actually the elements of the college essay should be and what the actual objectives are. But usually if they work on that for like 2 or 3 weeks at the beginning of the school year, uh, I think it messages, the expectation of college, first of all. And then it gets, the teachers acclimated to, the potential windfall of essays that they're going to be asked to edit and provide feedback on. But it also gets it done too in a timely fashion, which I think is really the most difficult piece, because you can sort of negotiate some of the application deadlines, and they're usually a lot later. But like if you have it done at the beginning of the year and you message that that's sort of the expectation for your school, I think that's worked really well for me in the past.
Yeah, that's the thing that's key too. Just like I remember when I was working in the South Bronx, um, they, I was the college counselor. I was working in two schools actually in the same building, and between the two schools there were about 80 seniors. So imagine trying to edit 80 essays, right? And I'm only one person. It's a lot. Is almost impossible. So, it really came a lot to when I first came. Yeah, having those junior English teachers included a part of their curriculum, because for them they didn't know the importance of the essay and how helpful it is for them to incorporate it in part of their class. Because like, I'm always stunned when, because students are so used to these formal essays that when it comes to writing essays about themselves, they freak out and get frozen. They don't know how to write about themselves. So definitely try to build up rapport with those junior English teachers. They will be your best friends, and hopefully they can incorporate that as a part of their curriculum. And I remember in the school in the South Bronx, it definitely made a huge deal when those junior English teachers did include it as a part of their curriculum towards the end of the year, to the point that when senior year came around, I wasn't really editing essays that much. It was more about, let's fill out these applications. If we have supplemental essays to do, let's work on those as well. But I personally think the college essay is something that's probably the most time consuming part of the application, and we definitely want to make sure that we have a bunch of allies as much as we can. We don't have to just only do this all around on our own. Any
Hi,
other?
Danny.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Jen. How are you?
Hi, good, and you? Good to see you. Well,
Good
good
to
to see your name.
I want to first thank you for your statements on test optional. One thing I'm telling my students is if a college, like you were saying, if a college is going to make you risk your life, it's not worth it. Do you have any advice for students who are really not listening to that and saying, I understand what you're saying, but it's worth the risk?
That's a heavy one. I haven't come across it yet. I'm sure that when school starts and I'm meeting with students one on one, because there's definitely like a couple of them that has not taken it at all, and there are some who are definitely who probably will want a higher score. All you could do is just like say your piece and that's it. A lot of this work is like say your piece and then it's really up to them, at the end of the day, if they'll do it or not, if they'll follow through or not. But, sometimes, maybe even a lot of the time, no one's telling them things like that. Like, right? Like if a college is still requiring, test scores, like you already know the messaging from College Board, you already know the messaging from ACT, and a lot of the discourse that happens online of folks who are in favor of testing or whatever. The people aren't really actually talking about you are really risking your life by trying to take an exam, really trying to risk your life. And that's something you got to think about, like it is the possibility, because there's not even a guarantee, right, that you get into that school, that you get that merit aid. Like, is it really worth the possibility of what are the chances of you achieving this thing, right? It's like the lottery. Sometimes I think, like it's what I knew from this work right from the beginning. One of my colleagues told me is that it's not personal, it's all business, right? And and that really says a lot about a lot of these schools still requiring testing for admissions or merit aid. It's all you could do is say your piece. Hey, like, you got to think about this. Like, at the end of the day, do these schools value your life if they still require testing? I understand money is important, but there are other avenues for you to have safer options and have more affordable options, and maybe you can transfer there later or what have you. One thing that one of my former colleagues also told me too, is at the end of the day, and this might be kind of controversial, it doesn't where you go your undergrad, no one is really thinking more about your undergrad. It's more about like where you go to graduate school, you know, where you getting your grad degree from if you go on to that level. So I think a lot of the time students are worried about the name, and of course, the money as well. But you got to think to yourself, like, what is the safest option? All right, let's talk about how 20% of Harvard's incoming class is deferring for a year. Like that should say a lot within itself. Like, do you have the ability to defer? And it's about saying your piece, and all you could do is just be like, all right, it's really up to you at that point. But it's up to us to say what needs to be said, because they might not be hearing it from anywhere else. And definitely early on in my career, it was tough for me to say things and students not follow through with them. But I learned over time, the it's better for me to say something than to not say anything. And whatever they decide to do is really on them at that point. Hopefully they listen to the sound advice, but if they don't, then they can never say they never heard, right? So it's for those students who still choose to do it, it's very unfortunate. I hope they could do it safely, but I just don't see how you could test on a regular testing site safely, especially when you probably have to go 300 miles away to another city, another state, or whatever, with the possibility to try to find a seat. And then you might not even find a seat, period, to find out there's a letter on the door that the test center was canceled, So, the other thing too is you could just hope with those students who are adamant, just hope in your mind and pray that they just never sit for an exam. They keep trying, and it just doesn't happen for them, because at the end of the day, at least they're safe. And for me, like, I'm more concerned in this day and age about their safety than financial. Financial comes after their physical safety for me at this point.
That was really helpful. Thank you. One of the things
You're
I've
welcome.
been trying to do is make sure that they register later, because I just think that by the time we get through the next couple of rounds of testing, it's just not going to get off the ground. So for my juniors, pushing them all the way into the spring, and for my seniors, telling them it's okay to apply a little bit later this season, and trying to get them to a later testing date, which I hope will be canceled. But I think it was really helpful to hear, just let them make the decision and give them the information.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I said, information is king, and I always think to myself very often, what I would have wished people said to me when I was that age, and if I was in the shoes right now, these high school shoes right now, I would hope someone would say something like that to me, because it's not something I'm probably even thinking about, because I'm probably just thinking about I need to test because this is what you're supposed to do, right? Um, any other questions or comments? I guess not. But if you like to engage me some more, definitely, email me, um, interact with me on social media. It's one thing for me is that I think it's important for us to not hoard information, right? Because I always think to myself, what if I was that student who was very bright, who has the capabilities to be at a selected institution and succeed or whatever, if, like, for example, if I was never in that CBO in high school, but I still had the grades, still had the ability and stuff like that, but I wasn't even aware Skidmore or what have you. I always think about students like that very often, right? And um, it should never rely on, students it should never depend on where you live or where you grew up for you to have access to certain information. So I did this workshop today to just try to spread some of my knowledge, spread some of my skills, and hopefully, we can all like get more and more students into select institutions, this kind of group into select institutions, because that's something that's very important for me, and I know, it changed my life. And just know that, no matter what you do, you might not know it in that moment. You might never know it, but you do have lasting effects on your students' lives. So thank you all very much. I hope you guys have a good academic year and be safe. And I hope to hear from some of y'all soon and interact with y'all on social media. And also as well, I hope to, keep on engaging you more and sharing more resources, whether through my website or whatever. But again, thank you all very much, and take care. All right. Peace.